Welcome, everyone, to this month's edition of our Lift Every Voice book club for contemplative writers of color. And I'm delighted, as always, to be joined by my ongoing conversation partner, Claudia Love Mair. And this month's featured author, Sophfronia Scott. So Sophfronia has an MFA in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and she's been an award-winning magazine journalist for Time Magazine, a novelist, and is the founding director of Alma College's MFA in Creative Writing. And her latest book, which is the focus of our time together, is The Seeker and the Monk, Everyday Conversations with Thomas Merton. So welcome, Sophfronia. We're really excited to talk about this book with you. And Thomas, our good friend, I love how you refer to him by his first name often throughout the book. So there was such a lovely sense of intimacy in that. And I really had the sense that I think there were so many ways that I had the sense that you had grown in your friendship through him, through his writing, and through particularly being in the place that shaped him. So can you maybe tell us a little bit for people who haven't yet read the book, sort of what got you interested in this particular project, and yeah, how you discovered Merton and how we
Well, it's funny. It's a project I never expected to write.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you had told me, oh, you should write a book about Thomas Merton, I would have said, no, there are so many books about Thomas Merton. Books like this, all the way up to the ceiling about Thomas Merton. But I was on a panel at the Festival of Faith and Writing. The last one, as it turns out, the last one that happened in person, which was 2018. A friend had invited me to be on that panel. She knew that I was a fan of Merton, that I, was reading Merton's work, and that came about because of my MFA program. I first heard Merton's work there and was just so enamored of it that I just started, delving into this man's life and work. And she invited me to be on this panel about Thomas Merton. And it wasn't until I got on the stage and looking at my fellow presenters that I was thinking, whoa, I'm not a theologian and I don't study Merton like an academic. And I'm thinking, I better tell people this because they may expect something of me that I don't have. And so I told the audience right away, it's like, look, I'm not an academic, I'm not a theologian. I kind of have this monk who follows me around and gives me advice. So that's how I'm going to talk to you about Merton, which is basically how I read him. And that's what I shared. And it was apparently so striking to people that they just kept talking to me about it throughout the rest of the conference. People would come up to me and say how much they appreciated it or how it helped them find a way into Merton. And one woman finally said to me, and you're writing your Merton book, aren't you? And suddenly I was like, oh, yes, I am. I am. But because I could see now what my Merton book would be, because it would essentially be an answer to the question that seemed to be going on there, that people wanted a way into Merton. And I felt, oh, I can model that. Okay, I can show you how I read Merton and how I think about this. So that I can do. That I know that nobody else has written because only I can tell you how I read Merton. So yeah, I'll do that. I can write that book.
Yeah, I love it because it did feel like a refreshing way in to a conversation with him that I hadn't read before, having read a lot of Merton books. So I really appreciated that. Claudia, do you want to kind of take it from here?
Yeah. How did you as a writer come to the form that you wrote the book in? With an MFA, I'm sure you could have approached it several different ways. So how did you structure it in the exact way that you did?
Well, there are many levels of structure. So on the one hand, I knew that I was going to be in conversation with him, right? Which to me is no different than really putting on page something that we all do, that we all have conversations with books in our heads. So I was going to try to put that on the page. Second level, I knew that in terms of an order, I knew that I wanted to approach different topics. So topics that would be interesting to me, topics that I was dealing with in my life, topics that I felt that are going on in society today, right? So I knew I would have chapter by chapter different topics. Now, when I started presenting work to my editor, I said to her, I have no idea what order these chapters need to be in. I don't know. Valerie Weaver Zerker is her name at Broadleaf Books. She was, she didn't know a lot about Thomas Merton. So she was always coming to the conversation, asking questions about Merton and coming at it as a fresh reader. And she would always remind me, a lot of people don't know Merton. So and because in the manuscript, I was constantly speaking as though people did. And so when she spoke about that, and the more that came up, it occurred to me, well, what if I structure this as almost like a biography and still approach these topics, but approach them in the order that he most likely would have been dealing with them in his life. So this way we can talk about materialism when he's young and he's giving things up and going into the monastery. We can talk about ambition as he rises in prominence as a writer. We can talk about love when he falls in love in his early 50s. We can talk about death when that is on his mind and he's approaching that. So I saw a natural arc there. I was like, oh, yes, this will work and this can do it. And I felt it unexpectedly gave the book a piece that I didn't even know was missing, because the more I engage with other readers of Merton, actually, I shouldn't even say readers of Merton, fans of Merton. There's a huge Facebook group that I'm a part of. And every so often, there will be people in the group who will say, I've always liked Merton. I like these quotes and such, but I haven't read Merton. And they will ask, where should I begin? Right. So I realized that there was a space for this book, not only to share his thoughts, but also to share his life.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, because it definitely feels like such an engaging doorway in, and through the conversation. And I really loved the conversation you had with him as a writer, because I was, Claudia and I are both writers too, so I was anticipating the excitement of just being in a space with all writers and talking to Merton, and especially all the internal struggles that he had, and the ego and the ambition and the overwork. Not that I can identify with any of that, but and then you say, to him on page 39, where you I love how you address him directly. Thomas, I wonder, is it wise to starve the monster even as you're holding it off? And then the next page, you realize that he must have understood that he was only provoking these aspects in himself by trying to deny them. So I thought there was just so much wisdom there. First of all, I loved that you, a contemporary woman, was speaking to Thomas and offering him like the wisdom that he needed, which I thought was just brilliant. But how do you work with your own struggles as a writer, especially around these issues of ambition and humility that obviously Thomas Merton struggled with, and how do they coexist with, how does this feeding the monsters, how do we work with that as writers? I want some advice.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that there is that feeling there when you open up the paper. I know I feel this when the paper, listen to me, I'm dating myself. When you open up your social media or an email and you find out someone has won a prize, right? Or someone has gotten a 3-book deal. And as much as you're happy for that person, I know I will say, I know that I feel that sense of, oh, wow, I didn't get that. and you have to acknowledge that, because it's real. It's not like you can stuff this fog into a container. That's like a child wanting to be fed. And so I have to acknowledge that feeling, because to me, it's a sense of, well, maybe that's telling me something that I want. And why do I want it? And are there other ways that I can get it, if not this way? Right. So to me, acknowledging that it is a big part of it.
Yeah.
But also when you talk about humility coming in, I have a phrase that I tell myself. Sophfronia, you can't have all the cookies, right? Because it's not like I am wanting as a writer. I've published books. You know, I'm going to be at the Merton Center next week, or no, in 2 weeks, delivering a lecture. You know, this book won the Thomas Merton Award, and my other work has been recognized. It's like, what am I missing, right? So and sometimes I will look at my bio, or I will make a list of things that I've done, and acknowledge that I work really hard and good stuff is happening, right? And so I can't have all the cookies, you know, I can't win all the awards. And so you know, and just be okay with that, but also acknowledge that sometimes that pinch is still there. But then, you know, let's say that I have to laugh at myself. I have to laugh at myself.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's no fun, is it?
Yeah, no. And I love the balance between, you know, acknowledging our desires and knowing that envy can help reveal to us something that we really want, and the gratitude for what we already have. It's a really beautiful balance. Thank you.
I like to remind myself that there's room at the table for all of us, and that we'll all bring what we bring. You know, my friend Tracy wrote the book Black Joy, and she's everywhere now on Good Morning America. But I have an amazing job. I'm not on Good Morning America, but what I'm doing just gives me so much gratitude and excitement. So
exactly. You know, this is something that I bring to you know, Claudia, not you, Claudia, Christina.
That's okay.
Christine mentioned that I'm the director of an MFA program, and a big message of this program is your voice matters, because I will have potential students come to me thinking that, well, I'm not sure I can be this best-selling author, or I'm not sure anyone would care about what I have to say. But that's not the point of writing. The point of writing is that you have something to say, and the fact that you are interested in coming to the table is important. So let's look at that, and let's figure out the best way for you to bring what you have to offer into the world. And you don't have to end up on Good Morning America. It's like, this is the thing that matters. So yeah, it's about putting out that message that we have so much to offer as is.
Yes. Well, speaking of as is, this quote on page 44, where Merton says, "I will never fulfill my obligation to surpass myself unless I first accept myself. And if I accept myself fully in the right way, I will have already surpassed myself. For it is the unaccepted self that stands in my way and will continue to do so as long as it is not accepted. When it has been accepted, it is my stepping stone to what is above me." So what does this self-acceptance look like, and how is it different from the way we're taught to love ourselves now?
Well, first, Claudia, I need to understand, what is your definition of the way we are taught to, you know, self-love? Like, what is that definition, and how do you feel we are taught to learn self-love?
I think now, especially in pop psychology, there's this, there are these ideas like, you know, you have to love yourself before you can love anybody else, and, you know, stand in the mirror and say, I am beautiful, I am lovable. I think this is a counter to self-loathing that so many people feel, that is damaging to them psychologically. So to me, it looks like, you know, a balance, you know, a cure, a remedy.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Now I get it. So to me, this is about, you know, like you said, the self-love thing is about, I am beautiful, I am this, I am that. What about, I am Sophfronia, I am Claudia? What exactly does that mean? And self-love is truly about understanding who you are and all of who you are, right? and that includes, like Merton is saying, right, that tough part of ourselves. And that doesn't mean that, because I think I think a lot of people have issues around that self-loathing comes of thinking that they are not supposed to be something, right? They're beating themselves up because, oh, I'm this, and I know that I'm not supposed to be this. Well, how about, well, this is how I am, and it's not like you're saying this is okay. Well, if I'm a sharp or a mean person, that's okay. But it's recognizing it and then either doing something about it or somehow finding a way to work with it that allows you to be compassionate with yourself, right? And if you find that within yourself, you can find that in others. And it also makes it possible, I feel, to better handle the hard parts of ourselves, right? Because if we loathe the difficult parts of ourselves, and again, we're trying to push something away, then we don't understand why it's there in the first place. So it doesn't get fixed. And that's why it keeps coming up. Not fixed is the word, but it doesn't get dealt with or nurtured or, what it needs. It doesn't get what it needs. So it's about recognizing, I guess, is the word, recognition, recognizing who you are, and all of, it's like that John Legend song, right? All your perfect imperfections, loving all your imperfections, but not expecting somebody else to do it, but expecting oneself to do it, right? At my very heart, I know that I'm still like 7 years old, and I will, have a tantrum with God over, whatever. But at the same time, I also know, like, just like with the cookies, I know that little girl needs a piece of cake sometimes, right? Or a pretty dress, right? That they have to acknowledge the things in me that make me me, right? And to me, that's the easier way to go through the world than fighting oneself. There's enough to fight in this world, right? But we can't go on fighting ourselves if we're going to do the things that we're meant to be here to do.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. So much better than that mirror work.
Yeah. Because the things that we need to see are in here. They're not necessarily even in the mirror, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And I want to shift our attention a little bit to Merton's relationship to nature, because I also feel like a lot of this inner work that you're talking about happens in a different way when we're in that space of silence, when we're not, in that kind of busyness and the full of noise. And you talk about this particularly in chapter 4, and you share that lovely story about walking to the lake at the Abbey and then feeling that call to keep going into the forest, even though you were going to miss the prayer time that was on the schedule, and that sense of, I'm giving in to the silence. I didn't know how far I was going, and it didn't matter. I'd surrendered to whatever would come next, which is so beautiful. So how does this posture of surrender to what's unfolding in the moment guide you in your own daily life and your writing practice, and even in that like work with yourself and those parts of ourself that come up when we don't expect them?
Yeah. It's funny. I was in a classroom where the professor was talking about fate, and he was interviewing me about, what's destiny and what's fate. And I was explaining to him that, I don't think things are predestined, but I do believe there is an energy, like there's things happening, God at work and a story playing out. And to me, it's about constantly being aware of where my role in this story is. And sometimes, and the wonderful thing is that if I don't take up a role, it usually will come back around. Like if somebody I'm supposed to meet and I just, ignore that person at 3 different parties, that person will show up again at someplace else. But so we don't miss out on chances. But to me, it is about being aware of wow, there is something missing or something I'm concerned about, and boom, there's an opportunity there that I did not expect, that it's like it's something is being offered to me to not only help me with something that I'm missing, but can play a bigger role for other people as well, right? And in order to do that, you know, someone asked me, how is it that I tend to accept like that things happen as a sense of faith, right? That the flowers showed up when I needed to see them and things like that. And I'm like, well, I see it's like a gift, like recognizing these unexpected gifts. And it's not like a child at Christmas, you know, you show up with a present for a child. It's not like that child is going to say, oh, that's not for me. What kid have you seen ever do that at Christmas, right? So to me, it's about just being aware of what's going on inside of me and how the things around me may play into it. The poet Rilke talks about this, that how so many things that happen to us aren't just randomly happening, that they actually started somewhere within us. And that if we take time to recognize in the stillness what is within us, you know, he said, how many times do we encounter dragons when really those dragons are something within us waiting for us to take this moment to be brave, to be beautiful, right? That and so that if we do that, you know, we will recognize the challenge is meant, you know, is going to bring something out of us, and not just, oh my God, this horrible thing has happened, right? So there's another wonderful book, I believe it's called, the guy's first name is Michael. The book is called The Surrender Experiment, where he talks about making these choices in life of not being beholden to, well, I'm not going to do that. I hate that idea, or I would never go live in the forest, or I would never do this. But to be open to, well, this possibility has come up, not to necessarily say no right away. Shonda Rhimes has a book like The Year of Yes. What if we say yes first and then see what happens? Right.
Yeah, it's like opening up this enlarged conversation with the world, which seems like also the heart of what a writer is and would strive to be, you know, to always be in that enlarged conversation. Beautiful.
Yeah.
When I was a young writer, and this is way before any publication, I was a teenager at this time, and I didn't get published till I was like 40. So I wanted to know the names of things. I thought that was so important, you know, to be able to connect with things by calling it what it was or who it was. But now that I am a writer who is multiply published, I still don't know the names of things. You know, I got kind of busy, and now I live in an apartment complex surrounded by apartment complexes, and I don't even know where to begin to learn the names of things and connect with things like that. So what advice do you have for me, and what kind of resources, you know, where do I begin?
Well, first of all, what things, right? That's that, because what things are you wanting to name? Are they flowers? Are they birds? Are they spices? Right?
All of the above.
Right. So it's about you in any given moment. Because it sounds to me, Claudia, like these things come up for you constantly. It's not like you're out somewhere like walking in a forest or somewhere, but to seize that moment to find out, right? How many times do high school students, like they'll be reading a book and they'll just gloss over a word that they don't know, and we tell them, well, stop and pick up a dictionary, you know, find out what that is. And we have so many resources now. Like there are apps that you can take and say, oh, take a picture of a bird or a leaf. What is this? And it will tell you. But you have to grasp your curiosity in the moment and not just say, oh, well, I'll find out about that later or whatever. There is, and for me right now, it's not wanting to lose those names of things, right? So when I lived in the city, actually, when I first learned how to garden, and an elderly woman named Wanda taught me so much. She taught me how to prune trees. She taught me how to plant bulbs. And now, no matter where I am, if I'm walking past something, I will name the thing in my head so I don't lose that. Oh, that's a juga. Oh, that's vinca, right? And if I don't, look it up. But I do think there's a connection to just knowing what something is, almost like, knowing our names, right? I know that you're Claudia and I'm Sophfronia, right? So it's a way of being at home in the world.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, it seems like an extension of that conversation that we're talking about with the world, and knowing each other's names is kind of the starting point. Actually, I would love for you to read a passage, because your writing is really beautiful, and maybe on let's start with page 60. There's that middle paragraph that starts with "I feel closest to the earth." I'd love to hear you read that.
Yeah. I feel closest to the earth after the rain. The ground is so soft, and as I walk it, I have this sense of coming home, like I want to lie down in the forest after a warm spring rain, only instead of lying on the earth, I have become the earth, alive and wet and teeming. Flowers could germinate beneath me and grow roots and tendrils through my body until they come from my skin and bloom and bloom and bloom through my mouth and from every square inch of my being. The feeling is exhilarating and devastating, sublime.
It was so perfect. And I love that closing line about, I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about holding that tension of the exhilaration and the devastation of being alive in the world, and if Merton taught you anything about that as well.
There's a part also in this chapter where he talks about realizing that he's no longer afraid of lightning. Once he's out there in the forest and walking around, and he feels so engaged with it. So it's kind of like that that the world is not necessarily safe, and yet you can't hide from it, right? That this paragraph is also informed by there's a wonderful, intriguing, very artistic movie called The Fountain with Hugh Jackman in it. And it's about a man who is basically trying to desperately find a cure because his wife is ill and she has a kind of cancer. But it also tells the story of a Spanish conquistador looking for the fountain of youth. And there's a scene where he finds the tree that is supposed to have this special liquid, and he drinks of it, right? But the effects, and I don't want to have a spoiler alert, but the effects are life-giving, but also terrifying, so that he becomes the earth in a way that he did not expect. And I just remember just feeling, yeah, that's it. I'm horrified, but yet at the same time, yes, that's exactly what it is. And isn't that the essence of Ash Wednesday, right? That we are from dust, and to dust we will return, right? So we can either be fearful of that, or we can embrace that.
Yeah, and I love that it's not an over romanticization of nature, because there is that, real terror. Yeah.
I mean, dark sky. I still think about how dark the sky could get. I grew up in Ohio, right? So when the tornado warnings would come, and it would be dark as night, the skies, and it would turn green, and yet, and it's a scary time, and yet I was absolutely fascinated by how dark it was. And I walked home once in a thunderstorm because I was just fascinated by the darkness in the middle of the day. So.
Beautiful.
I remember those green skies.
Yeah.
When you see that green sky, it's about to go down.
Yeah.
I want to ask about the 4th Street Epiphany, but I want Christine to ask her question first.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking about that. Yeah, well, I love, I've read that story about Merton's Epiphany on the corner of 4th and Walnut so many times, and I didn't realize that scene that you write about later, where he goes to the city with such disdain for people, and it's hot, and and it definitely made me smile at how human he is, and then you write, part of me wants to say, "What the heck, Thomas?" Which is such a great line, but I also understand. So I'm wondering, how do we anchor these moments of epiphany about life's beauty and grace in ways that can endure and sustain us? Because life is so damn hard sometimes, and so incredibly beautiful. So how do we let that that beauty really continue to nourish us?
Okay, so I guess this is a Buddhist concept I'm about to present here, but when we have trouble with our lives and with the world, it's because we're trying to hold on to something that is not meant to be permanent, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we want things to be in an unchanging state.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can appreciate the moments of epiphany if we don't expect to be in epiphany all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be in this vaunted state of perfection, right? And to do that, we can, if we do that, if we can let go of that, we can accept the fact that life is messy as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's still life. It is still life. Someone once said to me when I was in a very particular busy time in my life, and she said to me, and I said, "Oh, things are crazy right now," and she said, "Are things crazy, or is this just your life?" Right? I was like, "Oh, yeah." Right. And it will always be this way, right? It's not as though I will never have appointments or never have,
Mm-hmm.
things to do. That this is life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I choose to ride this surfboard?
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, as a writer, being able to speak to the epiphanies, but also speak to, those moments of disdain, and, being able to, be real about the full spectrum of what life holds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's and this is the thing I think I was looking for when I started reading Merton's journals, is that, we we are so quick to make people, he's a saint, right? He's a mystic, he's a saint. Well, he is a human being. He was
Mm-hmm.
a
Yeah.
human being who had frustrations just like we did, who was
Yeah.
unsure of his faith sometimes, who didn't know what he was supposed to be doing in the world, and yet kept coming back to his faith to both anchor him and to lead him on this journey where he did not know where he was going. So so to me, that is a wonderful lesson to share, that to see that someone could be so anchored in faith and yet be so unanchored, right? Because that is what we all are, trying to find some way to be in the world, while still being knocked upside the head sometimes by the stunning, awful things that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of stunning, awful things,
Yeah.
4th Street. Now, I live here in Kentucky.
Mhm.
So when Breonna Taylor was killed by the police in her own home after they executed a no-knock warrant, Kentucky was, a lot of us had this sense of outrage. And 4th Street, around the area, right where Merton has had his epiphany, it was on fire. It was, day and night protests, the police coming in with tear gas and rubber bullets. And then there was also people looting and destroying property. So I'm wondering, and let me say that I know that Thomas Merton was really ahead of his peers as a white man with a huge platform, understanding these injustices and speaking out about it. So if he were present in 2020, where there were these protests, and it was also very polarizing, because there was one side that said, Blue Lives Matter, the police are doing what they're supposed to do. And then there are other people, were saying, no, this is unjust. Black Lives Matter. And what happened to her should never have happened. Where do you think he would stand? Blue Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter?
I think he would have said that all lives matter, but we don't act that way, which is why we need Black Lives Matter, right? Okay, so this is from a Merton piece, and it's stunning how prescient it is. He says, as long as white society persists in clinging to its present condition and to its own image of itself as the only acceptable reality, then the problem will remain without reasonable solution, and there will inevitably be violence.
Wow.
I had not heard that one.
This is from, and I highly recommend this piece. It's in his book, Seeds of Destruction, but this particular piece is called Letters to a White Liberal.
Wow.
And he discusses how, and he talks about how the Civil Rights Bill had just been passed, and he said, but it will do nothing, that until white society understands that it has to be, it will have to become hugely uncomfortable for things to truly change, right? That we all have to be exemplary on a certain level. There is, Toni Morrison talks about how, she talked a lot about how race is really a human construct. And Thomas Merton talks about how we are one, we are, unified. And this is also the vision that Martin Luther King talks about. But we only talk about this issue in terms of differences. We don't think in terms of really how are we alike, and can we be in a room together and have empathy for each other, right? I'm an NFL fan, right? So I've been watching the whole thing about college coaches being hired even before that lawsuit came up, and recognizing that Black coaches were not being hired. And in the conversation, the word comfort constantly comes up. Well, the owners will hire who they're comfortable with, right? People hire who they're comfortable with. Well, then why aren't we asking, why isn't a person asking the question, why am I uncomfortable with this other person? Why are other people, why are people of color not in my life, right? That there's a challenge there to say, well, there is something missing here in me, and that's not happening, right? And that's not about calling someone racist. It's about looking at who is in your life and how you feel, right? And challenging yourself on that level. And that's not happening. And this is something akin to what Merton is saying, is that until you recognize this discomfort, then we're really not going to get to the heart of the conversation, right? The level of empathy that's required here is not going to happen.
That reminds me of President Biden's decision to put a Black woman on the Supreme Court, and the backlash that he's getting, mostly from white men saying, what, this is racist, and you're excluding white people. But when you look at the Supreme Court over the years, you're not seeing a Black woman on the bench. And I like that, what you said is, are they examining themselves? Are they even examining history?
Yeah.
To see, no, there's not been a Black, there's nothing wrong.
Right. And here's the question though, is why, I would ask this person, why are you concerned that you're going to miss out on something?
Exactly.
Right? So because this is the empathy to me that has to come from the other side, right? Because the way so many, especially white supremacists, young white men or whatever, at the heart of what's going on with them is a deep-seated fear of loss. And this goes back, ages. The immigrants are going to come and take our jobs. Black people are going to come and take our jobs. This deep-seated fear, we're no longer going to be the majority, right? What is going on with that fear, right? And so what if, how do you take them down the road? Well, is it so bad if you're not the majority? Like, do you really think that you are not going to have opportunities? And I think you're going to be okay, because you have a bunch of people over here who did not have opportunities, and they seem to be okay. But I don't want to make light of it, but this is where the conversation has to happen. That we also have to acknowledge this fear that's going on there, to even have someone approach the president with this issue. It's like the all lives matter thing. Well, yes, all lives matter, but that's not how we're behaving. And we have to do something about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it would help but I do want someone to ask this question, to address this fear, because that fear is there. That fear is there. And this conversation won't advance until that fear is acknowledged. It's like, okay, I know you're not racist. You're not racist, right? And this isn't about like making someone feel better, but it is about getting to the source of what are your concerns around race. Is there something that you fear losing? Is there something? And let's talk about that and see if we can either heal that or help figure out, maybe it's not valid, maybe it is, but unless it's part of the conversation, then we don't move forward. We're constantly like this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if we can kind of go a little deeper with this idea around sacred activism. So how we're called to respond to things. And, you share this, obviously brutal and moving story about the Sandy Hook devastation, where you live and where your son goes to school and he loses a friend. And you talk about, I only have to step forward in my own vulnerable, broken, unkind, silly humanity. And I love that kind of, again, that sense of like, I can be imperfect and do what I can. And I wonder, what is the wisdom that you have and that you receive from Merton around how do we discern what is ours to do in response to different injustices? How do I know if I'm the one to ask that question, or is my thing to do something else? How do I listen for that?
Well, that's why I wrote the chapter, right? Because I'm struggling, constantly struggling with that myself. And sometimes it is about showing up in places like this and saying exactly what I'm saying right now. But it's also about feeling about, where am I effective, and where can and I find I'm like this. I don't know about you, Claudia. I find that as a writer, I tend to move toward what's not being said, right? So just like doing the Merton book, like I'm not going to write a Merton book because there are tons of things there, but I see the void. When I see the void, I will step into it. Okay, here's what I have to say and add to this part of the conversation. So so that the activism thing feels the same way for me, right? So if there are already a million people marching down the mall, right? Do I need to be in there, in that crowd, or is there something else that I should be pointing out from my stance over here on the other side of the country or wherever I am? So I think that's the hard part, but it's what feels right to me, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't. I'm just saying is to recognize what feels right for you. To go out. When my son told me that there was a time when he was in middle school when they wanted to do a protest, a gun protest, but they're very careful of the school, the students, of course, in Newtown being in the public, so they let them have a protest, but it was like behind a wall, and you wouldn't have known it was happening because nobody could see them. And my son complained about that, and he wanted to protest, and so I said, okay, there's a protest happening in Hartford, I will take you. And so he wanted to go. He made his signs, and I took him and his friends, and they all stood there on the wall. So it's like, if he felt the urge to do that, I'm not going to stop him. It's like, okay, let's go. So it's in the moment, working with what is. That's how I do it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it sort of reminds me of what you were talking about earlier, and kind of surrendering to what's actually happening in the moment and what's inviting you. Yeah, step by step.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's just the way I live, kind of, because I feel that way in moments of when the bad stuff happens. That is the thing for me. It's like, okay, am I physically okay? Then okay, now what needs to be done? I was actually a school bus driver when the Sandy Hook shootings happened, and I was a substitute school bus driver, and of course there were the bus drivers who they couldn't drive after that, of course. That this is the same day. And so once my son was home, I get the call, we still need to take students home from school. Can you drive? Like, yes, I'm okay. I'm mentally okay. I have to drive that bus because I know there are others who can't. So step into the void.
Yeah, beautiful.
In 2020, when all of the protests started, I weighed well over 200 pounds. I had pain constantly. My knee had become very vulnerable, but I wanted to get out there and protest. And my daughter said, no way, because what was happening in Louisville, people were having to keep a lawyer's phone number in their pockets, and you'd have to be ready to run away if you were tear gas and
right. And COVID was happening.
Exactly. So I was also medically vulnerable, and she said, no way, you couldn't even run if something happened. So I had to find a way, how am I going to respond to this? How can I share, what I'm feeling? And I did that primarily through my social media, where I had a lot of people's attention. So I can bring awareness, and I had to be okay with that. I had to be okay that I could not get out there.
Yes. Right. So you can't say one thing is better than the other. One is a higher calling than the other, right? That this is what I can do. And also, you have the gift of words. And so, Toni Morrison said, like, these are the times when artists get to work, right? We do language. Like, this is the only thing that's ever changed anything, right? So you were doing the thing that made, that you could be the small hinge that's swinging a big door, for all you know.
Yeah, I love that image. Small hinge on a big door. I'm going to be holding on to that one. Well, we're kind of moving to the end of our time, so I just wanted to close by asking you, Sophfronia, like, has your relationship with Merton shifted at all since you wrote the book? I find that, as I continue to teach material, that sometimes there's new insights that emerge, or just sort of a deeper conversation from people's questions. So I'm curious if Thomas is speaking to you in new ways, even from beyond the pages.
I miss the closeness. As much as I'm still read Merton, there are other things, other projects taking my attention. So I still think about my time at the Abbey, right? And it's not as though that conversation isn't there, but yet somehow I miss him deeply, right? And it makes no sense. On the one hand, I think about how, I say this in the book, that it seems like we have nothing in common, and yet we have so much in common. And isn't that the essence of unity, is understanding at the very core the things that we do have in common, and not these obvious, differences that are on the surface,
Yeah,
right? So
beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophfronia, so much. This book, The Seeker and the Monk, Everyday Conversations with Thomas Merton, is such a beautiful book, whether you're new to Merton and just want an introduction to him, or whether you read loads of Merton, like I have, but want a new way to be in relationship to him. I highly recommend it. So thank you so much. And Claudia too, and Titus the cat, who's been joining us too on screen. It's been wonderful to talk with you both. Thank you.
Thank you.